Just my name. Okay. Hey, hello everybody. My name is Justin Sim here. Today I'm at the SG Camera Store here. It's at Peninsula Shopping Center, and you can come up when you're free to check out all their accessories and what they have to offer here. But today, right, I'm actually going to go through with you how to load film. So just the basics of film. Film itself has been around for the past 200 odd years, and the medium that we're using today is the 35mm film, which is the traditional 35mm film that a lot of film photographers use out there. Many of y'all will already know that this is like this film actually you can still get it around different areas, and mostly you know, standard 35mm cameras like this, right, will support this roll of film. It's the, I would say, the most commercially available film out there in the market. So what you can do firstly, right, if you want to load a film, right, is to definitely check the ISO ratings for and what color you want to shoot. Of course, that being said, today we only have color negatives and black and white film. So black and white films like Ilford right now, they are the most popular and the most commercially available ones as well. So the Ilford HP5 Plus, which I believe a lot of you out there who shoot HP5 Plus out there will know about this film. It's quite popular among you know, all the major film shooters out there, and of course the Portra 400 or the Portra 160 ISO. So these two are probably okay, sorry, this 1, 2 and Tri-X. So I would say that for most of the photographers out there, they will usually buy this in bulk loads, like and they bulk load themselves, so it's actually cheaper than buying individual rolls. So they normally would just buy bulk rolls and then have their film loaders and then bulk load themselves. But of course, for many of you who don't shoot film regularly, I would definitely recommend you to try shooting at least starting with the Ultramax 400 codec. This is a general purpose film. Why I say that is because, as you can see here, right, all these film here are all at ISO 400 ratings. ISO 400 generally it's a multi-purpose kind of like film that allows you to shoot like between midday and just before sunset, during that range where the light is not too bright and you need more ISO to compensate for the light loss. And of course, if there is a low light situation during the early evening, I would still recommend you to go ahead with the 400 and then save for the next day instead of like shooting ISO 1006. I think generally when people shoot ISOs higher than 800, it's only meant for evening time onwards. You can shoot ISO 800 and probably get some nice interesting image during daytime, but of course everything will be in focus, very sharp. When we talk about shooting film nowadays, and especially when you buy you know, lens per se, a lot of people like to go for that depth, that shallow depth of field, which is the bokeh effect. I think a lot of people should probably aware about that term. Bokeh is generally a blurry look behind your subject. Your subject is in focus. So I will teach you guys how to do that in another episode, but today I'll just show you how to load film. Okay, so I think we can go ahead safely. We'll just put in a roll of film from Portra. Okay, so this is a color negative film. C41 process, that's what we call in the general layman terms. For black and white, it's generally done differently. That you don't have shops that run black and white film processing by machines, because I guess the loading of the quantity and everything, normally the shops would tell you that you have to come back 2 to 3 days after you shoot a black and white roll film, because they will manually hand you know, process at home. That's what the general idea is, which is why you have to wait slightly longer and pay slightly more for developing black and white film. Okay, so black and white film, of course next time if I'm back again, I will show you guys, I'll teach you guys more about understanding about the type of film that you should be buying if you want to start off shooting. This is black and white here. This is color film, right? So I'll be loading the Portra 400 from Kodak here, general favorite by most of us. We shoot color films, and the simple way to go about shooting, to loading a film. First of all, every 35mm film cameras or SLR or rangefinders, there's only two different kind of 35mm cameras out there. SLR is single lens reflex, and rangefinder is rangefinder, of course. So the difference between them is the mirror. I generally would not recommend you to do this, but for the simple showcase I have here today, I'll just show you what I meant by SLR. Single lens reflex is this mirror here, right in the camera that you can see. That mirror here, every time you fire off a shot like this, you can see the mirror will go up and close automatically. Because I'm using the OM10, it does not have a fully mechanical function for this camera. So of course, the camera itself and the light meter will detect accordingly to the exposure settings that I put in this camera. So I'll get to you on how to set the ISO for the camera, but it's important to note that if you are loading for a rangefinder camera, because some rangefinder cameras, right, you gotta be very careful when you have the lens cap on. Sometimes you can expose an entire roll of film without actually realizing that the cap has been on the whole time. So something to note. Okay. So step 1. Pull up the lever. The door will open just like this, and the way to gauge where the roll of film will start to travel from one end to another is to see where the lever starts. I know there are certain cameras where the lever is on the opposite side of the camera. Those are quite rare. I think those are meant for lefties, left-handed camera users. There are cameras out there, so if you buy one, just note that it's reverse if you're looking at this video. Okay, so we're going to start by loading the film this way. Bottoms up. Okay. Lock it. Okay. And then pull this much of film out, and you will see that there's actually a slit here. I don't know if you can see. Just about here. Okay, this slit here will show you where the film leader or the film tongue will actually slot in, just like that. Okay, so once you get this in place, normally I recommend you to push in just about right here. You can gauge, but don't put it like, you know, just midway. Sometimes if you pull too fast or you pull too hard, it might actually tear the film negative, or the tongue might just come out and you might just be exposing that same frame over and over again. So once you've done that, time to pull in some tension. Okay, so I would normally hold it this way, and okay, another thing is to note that there is actually grooves and like teeth on the top part of this section here and the bottom. So it's always good to see if your film negative is actually in place. Don't worry about like losing 1 or 2 frames in this process. You are learning, you know, gotta start somewhere. So I think it's good, safe to say that if you're starting it this way, just, you see, this is what I mean. This thing can come out if you don't slot it in tightly, but not to worry, because if you, like I said, if you push it halfway through or midway, it might only fall out and it would be dangling. So that's kind of obvious. But if you push it all the way through the hole here and it sticks out like that, it's fine. Okay? So once you get that tension right, okay, now you hear that? That is where your first frame is being set. Okay? So once the door is closed, everything is like sealed. So do not open the door until you are fully ready to, you know, process the film. That will be when you feel that the tension. If some, you see, the thing is that some cameras do not show you the film counter. And in fact, I know you some of there who are wondering, what if I buy a film camera that the film counter is always giving me problems, not accurate? Then I would say just play by ear. And what I mean by that is, every time when you advance to the next frame, you hear a tension. You also will feel it. If there is a tension that sounds a bit different from the normal way you roll a film, and just by estimation you already shot about 30 frames, it's safe to say that it's okay to pull a little bit, and then you would stop halfway. For most 35mm cameras, I know that they would have this tension just about this mark here. So you don't want to pull it any further, otherwise you'll rip the entire film negatives from the actual film holder here, and there's no way you'll recover it. Otherwise, that will be, it will just rip off from the canister, and you have to find a way to remove the negatives itself. Because if you open it, the light goes in, then the rest of your film will be exposed to light, and that's just a wasted roll of film. So once we do that, safe to say, because the first frame I already showed you guys is already exposed to light, so you can just fire off. Yeah, and there you have it. So I want to show you something else that is very important to note. For most manual cameras out there, they have a ISO setting function here. All you need to do, actually this is similar with the Nikon SLR and rangefinder as well. So you can pull up this lever and adjust it according to the proper ISO that the film is in. So it just corresponds to it. So this will tell the meter within the camera at what speed, at what aperture you should be, setting your camera when you're shooting an image. So I'll go by just adjusting to ISO 400. Okay, ISO or ASA is the same thing. Don't worry. ASA means ISO. Just remember that. Okay, so once we have it at 400, we can go out and start shooting. So the thing about shooting manual film cameras is that many of them have different ways of indicating the actual, image exposure settings in the camera itself. Some cameras, right, you have to half press and depress the shutter just to figure out whether or not the indication is actually working. They'll show you a light, they'll show you an arrow, or they'll show you buttons, they'll show you a needle. See, these are different ways camera manufacturers make their film meter correspond to the viewfinder here. Not too chim, but just to make it very simple to you, just by looking at the exposure setting and adjusting your aperture, that's all you need for this camera. For Nikon SLR, I would say that you have full control over the aperture, the shutter speed, and ISO. So what I mean by having control over your ISO, even for this camera, you can actually trick the camera to shoot it according to the speed you want. Meaning to say that if I have a roll of ISO 400 roll of film that is already expired, if it's expired for at least 5 years for color film negatives, you want to actually overexpose it by one stop. That's the least. So at ISO 400, you want to shoot it at let's say, because there's over time color negative, you need more light if it's expired, so you probably want to expose it at ISO 200 instead. So that's one way to go about it. So if you want to underexpose, that's called pulling. You want to overexpose it, it's called pushing. So those are the two things to take note of. That's all I have for film loading. That's film loading basics. But once we are done with this, right, there's actually a button below here that you can depress once you wind your roll of film back to the canister. That's when you know that it's done. Like after you feel the tension, you depress the lever that will release the tension and allow you to wind the film back into the roll. So that's how you actually remove the roll of film from the camera once you're done shooting, of course. So I think that's all for film loading. Shall we go on to history of film itself? Okay. So the thing is, I've been shooting film for about 5 to 10 years already, because I had the privilege of having my dad passing me to his film cameras when I was younger to shoot. But when I actually look back at the history of it, right, film camera only became really very popular in the mid 80s to 90s. the reason why I say it became more popular is because that's when it became more commercialized and more available to consumers like you out there. I'm pretty sure your parents might have had film cameras in their houses that they don't use anymore. And of course you can find those film cameras now everywhere. They are really available and it's cheap. But of course, film camera has its roots, going back all the way to the 1800s. I would say that that's roughly when we first know of people who tried to attempt to manipulate light. Then follow on to the 1900s, which is the 20th century. How we call it, 20th, 21st century. We are in the 21st century, so just over 100 years of development till we get to the DSLR that we are using today and the mirrorless cameras that you know. So within that 100 to 200 years, right? In fact, I think it's just roughly about 125 years. This is the history of cameras. So that's pretty short if you think about it. It's not exceptionally long. 100 years is just only a span over, how many decades over. But for film itself, right, it only started making its appearance in the form of sheet film. When I mean sheet, S-H-E-E-T, sheet film. The first commercially available roll of film is the medium format 120 roll of film. That was during the series, the Brownie camera series, which is, of course, if you heard of Kodak, you know that they are the first camera manufacturing company as well. So besides the fact that they came out with film, Kodak Eastman is the company. So George Eastman is the founder, of course. He and another partner. I'll go back to more details again on that. But you should know that saying that the father of all father film cameras would be the Brownie camera is an understatement, because without the Brownie film camera there would not be the need to actually invent a totally different film format, which is the medium format film. The medium format film we call it is 120mm, 120. That's literally the length of the film. If you say 6x6, we call it 120mm. So that came before the 35mm film negative that we're all familiar with today. Reason being is that in the past, right, people usually don't have access to commercially available cameras, and then they have people who carry those large format cameras, 8x10, 4x5. Those are the typical, I would say, range of cameras that people have back in the old days. And to get a photograph taken, you got to go to a studio, and the photographer will have a backdrop and proper lighting. So you have to remain still and sit as long as the exposure of the film requires you to. So those sheet films are what was commercially available back then. So that being said, the Kodak Brownie, back to that again, the series 3A, I believe it's the 3A because I own one. So of course, that was when I did the history research and everything. The Kodak Brownie 3A was the first, or per se, one of the first few series of Brownie cameras that supported 120 roll of film. So that progressed on when people start getting creative with the way they capture light. So that resulted in the invention of SLRs and rangefinders. Of course, rangefinders still come before SLRs, not to dispel any rangefinder lovers out there. Rangefinders came before SLR. It's a much different way of actually taking photo. Instead of having a mirror that closes up like the SLR, what you see from the viewfinder and the lens doesn't correspond in the sense that when you fire off a shot, right, you don't see the curtain go up. So for rangefinder lovers out there, you know that the beauty about shooting rangefinder is that you will never miss a shot. I think that's true to a very huge extent, but I mean, I've been shooting SLRs and DSLRs for a very long time, so I'm quite used to it. So when I first touched a rangefinder, I'm not used to the handling of it. A lot of Leica users out there still shoot, because Leica of course is still a rangefinder camera. So you have the curtain that would close when you fire off the shutter, and it will not affect the viewfinder or what you see. So you can tell if the subject has moved right after you fire the shot. That's probably the only sure way to know if you actually got the shot, if you're shooting with a rangefinder. But you got to get used with the parallax. What you see through the lens and what the camera is shooting is slightly different, especially when you're close up to a subject. You got to compensate for that parallax error. That's rangefinder cameras. For SLRs, what you see is what you get, literally. I mean, like, what I see here, I still have to measure the distance and the depth of field that I'm trying to capture the subject within. So that would literally mean that I have to, you know, shoot at the widest aperture as possible. We call it, when we say what is fast lens, when you say I want a fast lens, what it literally means is fast is another way for saying what's the fastest way the lens can capture light. Of course, the wider the aperture is, the wider the lens can open, more light can go in. So that, in a sense, is what is fast. Fast meaning the length of time which the light can get into the camera itself once you fire off the shutter. So when someone tell you I want a fast lens, they mean that I want an aperture that's wide, a large aperture. So the funny thing about understanding aperture is that large doesn't mean 16. Large means 1.8, like 1.95 or f2. Sorry, let me tell you. Aperture, right? The corresponding sign to that, it would be f. Okay, f2, f4, f5.6, and so on. The higher it gets, the smaller the aperture, because you have to see the aperture as a kind of like a circular, you know, plate with different aperture blades that close this way. So the smaller the aperture, means like f16, f32, the smaller the hole gets. So that's what they meant. If you're talking about f2 or f1.8, the aperture will get wider and wider. That's where more light can come through. So you need that kind of, you know, we need that kind of size when you're talking about shooting subjects in low light. Because if you're shooting in low light situations like the shot here, I would definitely need to shoot at 1600 ISO, probably aperture. I can shoot it at 1.8 aperture, but my shutter speed, I can probably shoot it slightly higher than 1/60, probably like 1/80 or 1/125, depending on the subject and where the light is pointing the subject at in this space. But of course, the darker areas, right, I will not be able to get so much. I probably need a longer exposure. So therefore, shooting at f1.8 in this low light situation, I would probably need to have a longer shutter speed to compensate for that. So that's the basis. Because we talk about photography, there's the trinity that we always refer to: the aperture, the ISO, and the shutter speed. So this is the trinity. Whatever you change here, it will correspond to the bottom two as well. So everything will change accordingly. And it's not an Illuminati sign, don't worry. I'll not show you any like gang signs or anything. That's how it works. That's the trinity that we all know today, and what we refer to as. For many of you out there who are wondering, how do I go about to start off and shoot film? Well, I would say plan your budget. How much are you willing to spend? Film nowadays you can get pretty decent, between $7 to $12 to $13. That's the range that for generally all the different films that we shoot commercially out there as well. So you will shoot just between these three for, I think, safe to say, Ultramax 400, HP5, black and white, and black and white Tri-X. And there's the 400 T-Max, which I don't have it here, so I'll go through another time. But these two are black and white, and this is color. Now, of course, we still have the Ultra 400, which is also a color film. So if I go by price range, right? Okay, these two are probably the cheaper or the more commercially affordable films out there. Then progressing on to the next tier. So if you talk about I want to have more grains, I want to have more image contrast, color contrast, I want to have more character in my film. Every film have their own character. Some people shoot HP5 here and push to 1600. You can still do that. You have more grains in your photo, and some people shoot that because it's cheaper to shoot, to push a Ilford HP5 to 1600 than buying 1600 roll of film of HP5 of Ilford. So I would say it's relative, you know. It's generally up to you how you like your overall image to be like. But of course, if you're starting, right, I would just recommend you to shoot either one of each. Okay. Once you're familiar with whether you are with the idea of black and white here or color, what would you like to shoot more? If you're shooting black and white, then black and white will have its own pathway that will lead you to many other black and white rolls of film. Color negatives, another side altogether. Okay? But color negatives as of now, besides developing yourself at home, which is actually tougher than, because the thing is that it's color negative, it's harder to process by yourself. You need to send it to color lab. Okay? You generally bring all these color films to a lab to process it. For a black and white roll of film, you can either do it yourself or send it to a color lab. It's the same thing. They will still do the same process which I will teach you in a subsequent episode, how to process your own black and white film, if you're interested. So that's all I have for film itself. I think generally if you are starting off, right, just put aside $100. That will get you somewhere to start off. But of course, if you want to get a more decent setup like this, how much is this going for?
This one with the lens about 300.
300 is the general price. Okay, I think a lot of Singaporeans out there, when they hear 300 or 200 or 100, they get afraid. But don't forget, if you convert that to US dollars, that's generally how much people pay in US. So sometimes when you see people talk about buying a very cheap camera at this price, oh, I bought a $150 film camera, that's in US dollars. Hello? That's not in Singapore dollars. So you gotta get that fact straightened out. Okay? So generally I will tell you 300 for a lens like this, and the, you know, this of course to me, I would say that you can actually get compact flash.
Yeah.
Compact, yeah. You can get a compact one to start off. How much is this? $45. You can start off with this and buy a roll of film and then go and shoot. That's generally the idea. You can go and take and play around first. See if you like to shoot film cameras. That's up to you. So I'll just put this aside first. Give you guys a rough idea how it looks like. This one will be a cheaper alternative to start off. So 45. Then you still have a slight buffer. You can shoot and process about 3 times. Buy cheap roll of film. Not very cheap, okay, it's about $7 to $8. You can buy this and then process it. Processing plus developing color roughly will be about 2 to 3 rolls. Yeah, for $100 budget, you can start off like this. Just to start off, just to get an idea whether you like to shoot film. Because of course, film is personal, individual preferences. If you like film, you like it. If you don't like it, you don't like it. It's very simple. But if you like it and you're watching this, you know where to come to buy your equipment if you need it. Yeah. So I think I can end off by saying that for SG Camera Store, they not only provide film cameras and film negatives per se, they do have a lot of electronics and camera equipment accessories here at a very affordable rate. You can buy almost everything you need here. If you're a professional photographer out there, you're a freelancer, you're starting out and you need to buy all the accessories, this is a place to go to. So that's all I have.